An exciting episode on Rethink Real Estate as we go through the evolution of prospecting and farming as we dive into the planning seasons. Nick Ayhan is a guest of the podcast, and this is something that we've gone through with him from our corporate team and helped sort of design with Chris, myself, and Daniel along the way. Nick approached us after an episode of the podcast, and we've designed a farming plan within certain areas of his that really encompasses the digital attributes of Facebook, Instagram, and also YouTube. So we talk all about that and the refinement of what his database looks like, all the way through to the refinement of the farm area data that you can gather and then start to target those individuals. This is a very comprehensive episode that is one of two. We're filming this at the end of October. It'll air in November, but ultimately we are going to do another episode with Nick, hopefully February, March of next year after he's really implemented it. This is the infancy stages of what he's doing, and it is a very comprehensive plan, and I believe the absolute gold standard to how a real estate business should be run for growth moving forward. Hopefully it helps. Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. Ladies and gentlemen, a big welcome back to the podcast, Mr. Nick Ayhan.
What's going on?
How are you, buddy?
Good. How are you?
Good. So, mate, obviously we've been working on a few little things together over the last couple of months. You know, Dan's been helping you out, but from a general concept perspective, you know, you and I sort of got together in the very first degree of talking about how we're going to digitalize farming. And that's what I wanted to talk to you today. You know, for those that know you, obviously we don't need the introduction, but for those that don't, is that, you know, you own the Harcourts business in Salem. You were a previous owner of the Silverton office. And ultimately, one of the things that you have done a really good job with is obviously solidifying yourself in that Salem marketplace, you know, through all of your contacts within the Russian community, first of all, and taken those contacts and now have started to, you know, spur your business out in the past. But one of the things that when we spoke, it was really about how do you expand your business even further in the marketplace?
Yeah.
How do you digitalize the farming perspective? So there's a great deal of people that have always approached me about this, Nick, and gone, oh, we love this idea and whatever it is, or I've seen them talking about it, but they just have lacked any type of execution in wanting to do it because it is a huge undertaking. How did you get yourself to the point of, hey, look, I really need to do this?
Yeah, I think it's, at least for me personally, what it was is understanding, like, you know, it's like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And it's, I've been at my level of production, like plus minus by a couple of units, even when I've been trying different things throughout the course of the last couple of years. I've been pretty consistent, and it's like, okay, well, there needs to be the introduction of a new lead pillar that's going to like really dramatically change the business, or at least help me level up. And you know what I mean? Like, there needs to be a new addition to my business on top of what I'm already doing. And so I knew it needed to be something that can tie back into my database, which I'm managing well right now. And that's kind of where we got together and started talking about the farming, how we can execute on that, and then creating action points. So it's not just, hey, I like the idea of this, but what do the next few steps look like? How do we collect that data? What do we do with it? And then putting a plan together, which you guys have been awesome about.
Well, let's talk about the fundamental, because I believe that this came from you. Just if I looked back and reflected sort of on our conversation, is that you'd realized that your business was going to stay the same if ultimately the volume of people within your database was going to be the same. Like, give or take, there's always going to be the element of referral that comes out of those people, and some of the cold perspectives that you see, like from a for sale sign or a sold sign or whatever it may be. But ultimately, I thought that was incredible insight from your perspective, is that, hey, if I have X number of people in my database, my business is only ever really going to produce X, up or down, minus, plus a couple, based on the cyclical nature of the year.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So when it came down to the plan, it went, okay, here's my general database that ultimately is created. Now, just to be clear, is that, Nick, your production is better than 99.9% of people out there. But that being said, is that you wanted to take it to the next level. So you've got your general database over here, and we looked at this plan around, well, how do we How do we prospect? How do we farm? How do we do that all localized in order to draw more people into the funnel of your database that come in as D leads? That's sort of the
Yeah.
one category that we sort of started off with. How do we get more D leads? And to refine a D lead, what do you refine a D lead as? Because I know what I refine it as, and it's probably going to be very similar. But how do you refine the D, C, B, A plus sort of categories of your business?
Yeah. So starting from D, I mean, that's anybody that comes in either through, they reached out through Zillow, an open house. Really, if you call them 2 weeks from the point of contact, they probably don't know who you are, and vice versa. You're not going to really have any relationship with them, just to give that like context of what that could look like. C is kind of a graduated level from that. They know what you do, you know them, but there's not a solidified relationship. B is like, hey, I'm working with this person. We're talking, we're either looking at homes. This is a listing lead that I feel pretty good about, but nothing's really nothing's closed yet, right? But we're working towards that relationship. And then just take a step back. It might be an old client or somebody you haven't talked to in a long time. They might really be a B lead in your database because some years have gone by or whatever has happened in between them, that I still wouldn't consider them an A lead for whatever reason.
That's such a strong point, mate. That's such a strong point. Like, I think that's so neglected, is that people think that you do a deal with them and they're loyal to you for the rest of time. It's actually really not the case. They're probably, there's in some categories, Nick, if it's been too long, they're probably a C lead, really.
Yeah. You have those clients where you feel like you did all the right things, but frankly, whether it's a personality thing or whatever happens in that transaction a couple of years go by, they're basically a C or a B lead. And so it's like, how can we graduate them closer towards that inner circle? And then getting into that A, somebody you've probably done a deal with, maybe two, like they're a strong client. You feel good about them potentially referring you business, but then you have the A plus lead, which we want everyone to become, but they're going to be only a certain percentage of your business. And that's like the center of your database. Those are the people that you've done multiple deals with or got multiple referrals from. And that can be clients, but it can also be industry professionals. It can be other agents out in outside markets that funnel you business. So it's just understanding like who your special people are and then developing a plan to, make them feel special, really.
Yeah, I just there's this part of this that makes me feel I don't know. I love talking about this, Nick, because the reality of a database. Like I was on another podcast yesterday talking about recruitment, and it's so easy because you're a business owner as well and you run your own business. You understand better than anybody is that if you're not constantly recruiting and re-recruiting your people, like your business isn't got that flow-in effect that ultimately you need, right? And that's so easy to understand in a real estate business, but so many agents really don't even think about their real estate business that way from a database perspective of re-recruiting and recruiting more people into it on a consistent basis. They typically get to a point of their database and go, no, I'm good here because I'm doing $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 in GCI and I'm happy with that. And they convince themselves of probably being happy with that. Maybe they really are, and maybe that's just me being a prick. But realistically is that, they get to this point where they just don't want to prospect anymore, don't want to re-recruit or don't want to do those different things. And I've seen it firsthand, Nick, of the slippage in people's business as well if they just neglect those people. But getting to the real point here.
Yeah.
Getting to the real point. Let's segue now to, okay, how do we generate more of those D leads on a consistent basis? You mentioned the categorical obvious ones of open houses and all of those different things, but Nick, we derived a plan, and part of that plan was, okay, now we need to really look into the Salem market and we need to really identify the particular areas that we want to have our business based in, because there is no point in us picking a part of Salem where realistically, if we're going to sell in a portion of Salem that is maybe more first home buyer orientated, it probably doesn't provoke more repeat and referral clients that we're meeting. Now, It's not to say it's the wrong thing. It's not to say we're not taking business there, but how did we identify the individual areas of Salem for you?
Yeah, I mean, first we knew we wanted to be in South Salem, an area that we wanted to grow market share in. And then it's just figuring out what neighborhoods we feel like are saleable over time. They're not gonna, like, for example, there's a couple of parts of South Salem and a portion of this farm, one of my farms that we've started working in, that I know is struggling a little bit because it's a higher price point, right? So it's finding that saleable neighborhood, like you said, that repeat referral business, really that second home for most families. So there's the ability for buyers to come and be excited about getting into this neighborhood. It's a stepping stone for others to get into another category of home. So ideally, a situation where there's going to be some level of turnover, and really that's the biggest issue in Salem. But then it's combining saleability and then obviously a price point. So there's a return on our investment. Do we like the average sales price here? Is it attainable for most home buyers looking at that market? Just those type of conversations, and then all the rest of the data that factors in to see, hey, with all these things that we like about it, when we take it through our data filter, like turnover, how long they're in the homes on average, does this make sense for us? And that's how we arrived on the three major farms that we're working on.
In your three major farms, from a data perspective, Nick, how many homes are in those three major farms?
It's like just under 14 or just over 1,400 homes. I think it's like 1,445 homes. And then from a transactions perspective, about 80 of those have sold in the last year. So we're looking at a turnover of like a little over 5.5%, which sounds lower than what you typically want in a farm. But like we all know, inventory isn't, we're all dealing with inventory shortages. So it's looking at what's the best grade farm wise that we can give these areas compared to other options. And then really just banking on inventory increasing over time. And then we're still putting in the effort. So ideally we're getting into that, growing market share in those neighborhoods.
And then I think that if it's really important for people to understand is that the 80 transaction isn't the goal here. It's to make up roughly about 60% of your entire turnover of your business from a listing perspective. Needs to come from the core farming areas that ultimately you're looking at. And I think that the other part that is a real thing that you've just mentioned here that I think is a point that a lot of people need to consider when they go into planning this, Nick, is that inventory hasn't been what it ultimately has been over the last 5 years since COVID or last 3 years since COVID, however long it's been. The market changed. So going back and looking at the historical data in 2017, 18, 19 might actually help you in order to understand what that farm area or what that area turnover is really got the potential to actually do. It's kind of making it, you're hedging your bet a little bit in that sense. Now let's talk about, you identified that area. Now, a lot of people would just be like, let's talk about the old way that people would have approached this, Nick, because now we're getting into the innovative element of what we really want to talk about here. And just to be clear to everybody on the podcast is that this is one of two episodes. We're hoping to do another episode with Nick in February, March of next year, once he's really developed this. This is only at the infancy stages of the planning element side of it. And the next part of the innovation in all of this is that if we were talking about the old way, we would start doing letterbox dropping, door knocking, whatever it is, cold calling, all of those different elements. And maybe some of that is going to be used, maybe some of it isn't in if we feel it. But realistically, what we wanted to do is gather all the data that we possibly could on all of the homeowners in those three core marketplaces, and then we needed to refine the data. So can you just walk us through the process that that was sort of entailed with getting all of the addresses, going to your title company, and then us refining it?
Yeah. So really what's cool is most title companies are going to have some type of tool because they have a lot of that data available. So we use Tycor here in Salem, and they had a great tool organizing the farm list. You can purchase the data and it'll give you, at least a tool that we use, it'll give you a grade based off of turnover, the amount of homes that are there, et cetera. And I think every market's going to have a title company that has some tool like that available. And then from there, it's, putting it into your CRM. We have everything set up in our workflow. So it's still in its infancy, like you mentioned. The biggest problem right now is that even though we got all this data, a lot of it's not very good. So it's going to take time to naturally just develop that just from reaching out, making individual searches on the properties where we know we're missing, can we use white pages, other software to pull in individual pieces of data. And I think it will be one of those things where 4 months from now, we'll look back like, oh my God, I can't believe we did it that way. But then going forward, it'll just be a lot cleaner. So it's the initial grab of data is very easy to do, but it's like you said, it's the development of that data over time. As long as we're consistent with it, when there's turnover, making sure we update the data, because that's important too, making sure we're not working with old contact details, and just that consistent development of the farm.
And I think that this is where we're going to lose 99% of people that aren't committed to this, Nick, is that the reality of what you're trying to achieve here is the absolute gold standard of a database. Like the thing that I would love you to be able to do eventually is that you could sell your business with a guarantee of X amount of deals that come out of it at the end of the year. Like that's the part of this that if we look at what we're trying to achieve. So going into those core marketplaces, pulling the data and then ultimately refining that data is the one thing that I need everybody to understand here. The refinement of that data is then going to give you the ultimate opportunity to then make sure that we're giving the right level of communication, because then it stems to the next part of this, Nick. What type of communication do we have to the people? What type then of plan do we have in order to show them? Because our real goal here is to make sure that in those core marketplaces that Nick Ayhan has the perception of listing and selling absolutely everything. That kind of is the end goal. But how do we do that from a digital perspective? Because then what you're managing at the moment is taking that data and then putting those people into audiences that then we can go through in social media and make sure that we can target those people with up-to-date relevant information within that market. Is that right?
Yeah. And so I'll start there with the meta ads that we're running. And one of the things that if anybody's run ads or boosted a post in Facebook, you understand that in real estate, you have to choose a housing category. It becomes a lot more general in who you can target, the area you can target. So one way to get around that is by importing that custom audience, which you already now have through the tools that, whether it's a Harcourts tool or any other title company, you now have this list of leads and you just have to format it correctly. And Chris with your team was awesome in helping me understand how to do that properly, formatting it correctly. And now we're running ads and testing what works, what doesn't. And again, very early on. So don't really have any results to show for it, but we're plugging it in. And then over the next couple of months, just seeing like what's really getting interest or, what's grabbing eyeballs, what's getting forms signed out, what's getting people on the website. And then there's the nitty gritty underlying of it, tracking them. So seeing who's gone to the website, retargeting them. And so again, it's just going to be this development of that audience, but that's a much easier way to target specific people because we have that audience that we import into Facebook rather than just targeting Salem as a whole. It would be really tough to hit those people. And we'd be spending a lot of money trying to do it, doing it unsuccessfully.
Nick, I really want to double click on all of the points that you just made so that people understand and really like taking your database and putting it in as an audience. What type of audience have you created? Do you have an audience specifically for your DCBAA plus? And then do you have different audiences for people that live and own real estate in each individual core farm areas or who might be investors? How have you segregated the audience that then is uploaded into social media? Again, I want to make this point. Nick is not just blanket canvassing social media ads.
Right.
He is specifically doing it to an audience within that marketplace. So how have you categorized your audiences?
So I'll show what we're doing now and then like what the next couple of steps are, because now that we know how to do this with our farm, we're like, okay, we can obviously do this with our database and get more specific in like the different A through D categories. So right now we just have an audience for the individual farms. And so for all our ads right now, we're grouping them all together. So the 3 farm groups, we've all put them into that same ad. The next more sophisticated version of this is doing the same thing with our database, but just like Ben, I know you personally. So if you were a client, right, a repeat client, I'm not going to call you and talk to you the same way I would with somebody that doesn't know me. It would feel impersonal, feel weird. It's the same thing with email marketing and any type of ad that we're putting on Facebook and the way that you're seeing me online. So the graduated step of what we're doing now would be, targeting D leads and C leads with a different type of advertising than the B to A plus that know us well. You know what I mean?
That's
the awareness so important. Is be different. Yeah.
I didn't think about that, mate. We haven't discussed that before, so I hadn't thought about that because it's kind of like 2 different communication plans, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is going to be like a totally different thing. So like separate from farming. And I think, again, when we talk about farming, those farming and database aren't mutually exclusive because really those farm contacts live in our database as D to C leads right now. And so we're still trying to graduate them up, right? So it's understanding like how to tag them properly to see where they originated from. So then when we go back and look at our data, like, okay, where's our business coming from? We know, did they originate in that farm or not? And so it's making sure we create the right tags and the right foundation. So as we build these contacts into a higher ranking into our database, we know what to do with them. You know what I mean?
I've got 2 final questions here because I do want to make sure that we stick to a timeline here. Is that first question would be, from a content perspective, Nick, what does your content plan look like at the moment? Because you're good in front of a camera. You've got a really good relationship with somebody that films there in Salem that does a
Hmm.
phenomenal job. People need to check out your social media so that they
They
can just
do.
rip off
Nick
ideas from
Ayhan
you.
on Instagram, Nick
They
Ayhan on YouTube. Plug that.
build that,
Yeah.
plug it. Let's plug it. We got the
Yeah.
links down below to people. Click, click, click. But I think that the reality though is that you've really figured that out for what you're filming and things like that. Like,
Yeah.
what does a general month look like for you of filming content and coming up with content?
Yeah. Recently, we've gotten a lot more focused. Before, it was just like shotgun out and like, you know what I mean, trying to make something stick. But really, what we've realized is working well is a specific, we're doing home tours and then area specific content. And then it's going to show up differently on YouTube than it does on Instagram and Facebook. So knowing that, hey, that same longer stuff is just not going to work on Instagram. It's not going to grab eyeballs and get people engaged, following us and interacting with us. So it's like yesterday, for example, we shot a home tour and a market update at the same property. That full home tour is going on YouTube, and we're working with our content guy to make sure our thumbnails are correct, our title, description, tags, and all that stuff are specific for the long form content. And then breaking up those pieces in like trendy ways that are going to do really well on Instagram. And so those trendy, they're really not call to actions. Those are going to be our awareness ads, either leading them back to our website or just trying to get them to follow us so they engage over the long term. And when they're ready to transact or do something, we're a natural choice for them to reach out to us, right? So,
Yeah.
And so it's not like, not everything's a call to action. Hey, call us right now. It's like it's a gradual, move to get them to follow us and then eventually see us as the resource. I'm trying to remember what the original question was, but basically it's understanding is it a call to action or an awareness act,
yeah,
right?
and but also, it's the that's where I'm going to segue into my final question on this, Nick, because I think that there's a part of this though, and again, I hope maybe you can tell me differently. But from the people that we have tried to do this with in the past, where it has completely fallen over, and other friends of the podcast that have been on, we've tried to implement this with them. Is that
it's hard.
But
It's like a lot of work.
this workmate is one thing that has fallen over. But the second thing is when we have had it up and running, they can't deal with the lack of gratification or lack of knowing whether it's working or not. They really don't see it as the way that I want everyone to see this. And I hope that you definitely are. And obviously I think you're a little bit more advanced with this stuff than what some of the others are, is that I don't think you will ever really know if a lead actually comes from it unless it comes through social media directly. Like, for example, 123 Smith Street in Salem, in South Salem, they call you and they go, Nick, I need you to come over and give us an idea of how to sell our house. Now, what has happened with those people? They drove past the sign dropping the kids off at school. Then you've popped up on social media at one point with them as well. But then maybe they got a flyer, and not saying that you are or you aren't doing that. Maybe they then got a flyer that they called you off. But realistically, it was a sign in the social media tool that then triggered after the flyer or whatever that ultimate thing was. But really, social media was a real big handle of that. Because they might have seen 3 or 4 videos of you on social and you've popped up and you're a familiar face and your name's a familiar face. So how have you approached this at this point, like knowing that there's probably not going to be the gratification going, this came from here? Like how do you deal with that?
Well, I'll answer that and just like touch on like a couple of quick things that we're doing now, just so we can timestamp like what we're doing now and how it might look different. So I'll start there. We're also reaching out to the neighbors to answer your question. Like, it's layers, right? So it's like the billboard effect. Did they call you because of the billboard or because they saw your flyer? It's like understanding we have these contact points, right? So minimum, we need to get on the phone with these people once per quarter. But it's the second Ben's house on 123 Smith Street hits the market, the 5 neighbors next to him on either side and 10 in front are going to get a call from us that, hey, when on the market, they're going to get an update via text when it gets pending. And when it's sold, there's going to be a call to action for market analysis. And then a couple other things we're doing from an email marketing perspective. So to wrap up an answer to your question, it's like, it really, if you've done content or social media, you understand it is a long game. You're not filming reels to be like, I'm going to get 10 buyer leads out of this one tomorrow. You can run ads and have a very strategic meta ad approach, but the reality is it's a layer to all the other stuff that you're doing. And for me, because we put out so much content over the last like 2 to 3 years, I know that when I go into a listing appointment and I talk to them about marketing, they're going to be able to go to my Instagram and be pretty impressed compared to Joe Schmo that like has a profile photo from like 20 years ago with John L. Scott. Just like we're going to be able to present ourselves in a very different and much more competitive way. You know what I mean?
Well, it just obviously that there's just so much more credibility, mate. Like I'll give an example is that we are not a big podcast. We absolutely are not. Like we are not a mainstream one, even in the real estate community. We do this to speak directly to the people that follow us and all of that type of stuff. But like the credibility that we have when guests like we get a lot of guests that reach out to us. They're like, oh my God, you've got so many episodes and so much content and so many videos. We would be honored to be on the podcast. And by nature, we're starting to get much bigger guests,
100%.
much more credible guests because of just the credibility that they go through just on that perspective. So all in all, I'm really excited to follow this and I'm really looking forward to the next episode here. I really hope that I personally think this has been a very comprehensive way of breaking it down, mate, but I appreciate you sharing what you're doing because I believe that this is the evolution of ultimately the proper farming in real estate.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you having me on, Ben. This was cool.
Thanks, buddy. So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.